Welcome. My name is Larry Pearson, Vice President of Marketing at Impetus Technologies, and I'll be your host and MC for today's webinar entitled A Leading Bank's Analytics Transformation Journey to the Cloud. Now, for those of you who may not know us, we are a U.S. corporation headquartered in the heart of Silicon Valley. We have a couple of things that we believe are quite distinctive about Impetus. The first is our specialization. And we specialize in helping large corporations achieve what has commonly been referred to as a single source of truth. That's also what has inspired our mission statement, which you see here on the screen, enabling a unified, clear, and present view of your business. The second thing that distinguishes us from many other service companies is that, frankly, we offer a set of services based on skills and experience, and also is supported by a complete end-to-end framework for bringing automation capabilities into that journey. And that broad range of methodologies, skills, experience, you'll see an example today of a case study that came directly from a series of engagements at a regional bank, are what really allow us to offer, wherever you are in your particular journey, a way to help you take that next step. And thank you all again for attending today. Before we begin our webinar, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping announcements. All of you will be on mute. You will, however, be able to ask questions through the chat panel on your screen, and that can be done at any point in time. It's an important feature of how we run webinars that adds an interactive component, and really encourage you to do that, as that's always one of the most interesting aspects of every webinar. We will allow time at the end to answer as many of those questions as time may allow live during the webinar. And we do commit that if we're not able to get to your question live, we will send that to you in an email. So I encourage you again to send those questions in. If you do have any audio or video issues during the webinar, we have a ops team on hot standby. You can reach them by sending an email to events@impetus.com, and we do recommend that you view the presentation in full screen mode, because we are going through, as I said earlier, a live case study, and it includes a look at some of the dashboards, charts, and screen images that pertain to that live case study approach. Okay. Let me now cover the agenda. We're going to start out with an overview of the whole matter of banks in their journey and aspiration to transform analytics, and very often involves a migration to the cloud. Share with you some of the best practices that we've developed in conjunction with them, and then talk very specifically about the Impetus Workload Transformation approach, which is a four-step methodology, starting with assessment and planning, transformation, validation, and finally execution. And you'll see a very detailed discussion of that from our presenters. What I'd like to do now, and again, another way we add interactivity to your user experience, is with some polling. You'll see a poll question appear on the screen, and that question says, what stage of the analytics transformation journey are you currently in? And you'll see 5 different stages here. Important that you respond to this, and it'll be open for the next 15 minutes from no current initiatives in place, currently under consideration, or you're actively in a proof of concept or pilot phase, maybe have even partially migrated some of your analytics over, or you've actually completed a full migration. And very often, people who are at whatever stage of either of these last two may have some issues, some areas that I revealed, some particular challenges. That may be why you're here today, and that'd be a great way to submit those, and we'll answer those at the close as well. So do respond to that poll. It'll be open for the next 15 minutes, after which we'll share the results with you, and look forward to having you do that. And now let me introduce our speakers today. 2 of my colleagues that are with us. Hadi Kotakala is Director of Cloud and Data Strategy. Hadi has 20 years of experience working with large enterprises in their data and data warehousing and analytics strategies. For the last 5 years, he's been doing that for Impetus, and is involved in all major engagements, starting from the early discovery and assessment and planning stages, and guiding them all the way through delivery. Also with him is Chris Ellis. Chris also brings 20 years of experience working with enterprises in a variety of technology-related projects, and he's regional director of field operations for our central region, and he'll be covering a good deal of what we covered today. And in fact, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you right now to get us into that agenda.
All right, thank you, Larry. Thank you. So when we put this webinar together, it was really based on the level of interest that we had seen within the banking industry in migrating their analytics to the cloud. And I think the poll is a good way to start this, because we're finding that, depending on the bank, there are various levels, in that maturity in migrating those analytics to the cloud. So the purpose of today was not really to get into, why is the cloud important? I mean, I think we all have a pretty good idea of that, but really to walk through an example of a bank that we're working with and some of the best practices, lessons learned, and the approach that we took with them, which is our Impetus Workload Transformation. So as we go through this, you'll hopefully glean some lessons and some things that you can take away from this, and certainly, we're here to support you as well. So diving into this client in particular and looking at what their objectives were around 4 areas. One was really an analytics modernization, so getting off of some of their legacy tools and being able to take advantage of, what's in the cloud today. And for them, they really wanted to go with cloud-native tools and to take advantage of, the faster processing, the lower cost that those provide. They also, as I mentioned, the cost optimization. So this was a client that really wanted to get out of the data center business and take advantage of just paying for what they use and being able to optimize their spend in the cloud. The third one is flexibility. So they've got some growing analytical needs. They've got a lot of data scientists coming on board, and being able to spin up, spin down, capture data that's internal as well as external, and being able to utilize all of that very quickly. And then finally, scalability. With any bank, the data is growing, and that, again, internally and externally, all those sources that are coming in, and being able to quickly scale up with that and not be stuck, trying to slowly do this in-house. So the approach that we're going to walk through today is really a 4-step from assessment and planning to transform, validate that transformation has occurred correctly, and then execute that in the target environment. First, I want to start with the best practices, because if anything, and you'll hear this throughout the presentation, but these are the takeaways that I really want to focus on. And the first one starts with assess before you begin. Quite often we deal with clients whose systems are 10 years old, they're not really sure what's being used, and how complex is it. So that assessment, it can often be an ugly word, and you don't want to pay for it and don't want to take the time to do it. But it's well worth it in terms of, if you're going to spend money and time to do this, to make sure that it's a success. Number 2 is enroll your stakeholders. And this may be the most important one, because if you don't have that buy-in, it's going to be very hard to be successful. I once had a client actually tell me, he said 80% of it's people and 20% of it's technology, and said the technology is just math. We can always solve that. It's about getting the people to buy into what you're doing. Number 3 was evaluate your technology options. So it's one thing to say I'm going to go into the cloud, but you have existing technologies, and you also have a number of choices. For this client, they looked at, on AWS, did they want to go Snowflake? Did they want to go Amazon Redshift? Same thing, EMR Spark, Databricks. I mean, there's so many choices out there. Take the time, get the technology choices right in that architecture. 4 is reassess your processes. Everything that works today is going to be different, in the cloud for the most part. And, that could be your, for banks, security, compliance. Sometimes those things don't work, or they're not as mature as you might think in the cloud. All these things need to be assessed as you're moving to the cloud, and make sure that there's nothing that's going to get broken along the way. Number 5 is measurable steps. And what I mean here is when you talk about a big migration, a big transformation, is break it up as much as you can into logical steps and logical groupings, and be able to take those groupings end to end and be able to demonstrate that you can operate this in the cloud. It also allows you to make things more manageable and also to get success more quickly. Number 6, be agile. Obviously, agile is the way we recommend. I think it's the way many people are doing it today, so I don't need to focus too much on that, but definitely look at an agile way to implement. Number 7 is use accelerators. When you're talking about migrating thousands of queries that we've got to transform into, from legacy code to the new modern code, you got to look where you can get ahead of that game. So it's not just it takes the time is obvious, but also the risk, that it's done correctly, it's done consistently, and we'll walk through some of that as we go through our approach and the accelerators that we can bring. Number 8 is upskill your people and processes. So obviously your people are trained today on maybe it's Oracle, Teradata today. We got to make sure that they're trained and able to operate in that new environment. The same thing goes with processes. This is a great time to say, maybe we should put more DevOps processes in place that aren't there today. Number 9 is have a decommission plan. And this one I include because sometimes it gets overlooked, and it's really a critical piece of the business plan of, why this makes sense. So make sure that that decommission plan is in place so that you can turn it off and achieve those savings that you're counting on. And finally, number 10, evangelize your success. This one often gets overlooked, but having success early builds more success, and it builds more interest, it gets more buy-in, and quite often, it allows you to take that next project. It helps you to get that funding for that next step when people start seeing that, hey, this really does work. So now I'm going to switch over to the approach that we're going to walk through in not just the slides, but I'll also show a demo along the way. And it's going to be along those 4 steps of assess and plan, transform, validate, and execute. And within these steps, we'll go through some more detail on, what happens along the way at each step and, the importance of it and how it fits into that overall transformation. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the first one, and I'll turn it over to Hari.
Thank you, Chris. So folks, as Chris mentioned, those 4 steps, a good overview of a 4-step methodology from a high level. Let me take you further into the details of the first step, which is the assessment. This is a very critical step undertaken to achieve the following goals. Primarily, one is to map out a clear view of the current state of the customer's environment, followed by it also helps us design and articulate a clear future state in alignment with the customer goals of transformation. This includes identifying gaps, if any, and creating a clear solution to address them. And lastly, the third key goal is churn out a detailed tactical roadmap and a clear plan for the transformation, which basically gives the customer an insight of how the execution of the project will go, what will be the detailed cost estimates and path forward, and likewise, from an execution standpoint, it eliminates all or any ambiguity that would otherwise be there. Of course, all this, when executed, is in guidance with the best practices that Chris touched upon, and it sums to minimize the inherent risks that are involved in such transformation initiatives. So that's the kind of quick summary of the assessment module. So what we bring to the table for this is built into the accelerator tool of ours in the form of an assessment module that contains automated tools built to facilitate a thorough assessment. We expect specific inputs based on the technology, and it helps to connect the dots for a typical transformation project in order to achieve those 3 goals. Now, there would be quite a few questions that would arise in customers' minds, like what are the inputs? What can I expect? Will I have to provide access to production? Is it an intrusive process? Can it be done offline, and etc.? There will be a lot of other questions as well. And they're all important questions that will come to mind. And I'm hoping to answer most of them as we go along through the course of the webinar. But do feel free to ask those questions in the questions box as they arise, and we'll get to them during the Q&A if they still remain unanswered as we go through the course of the webinar. So now some quick answers to some of those questions are: the process is unintrusive, wherein we can actually do this assessment in a completely without having to access your production databases. However, the inputs that we expect include artifacts such as good representative samples of your application logs, database execution logs, orchestration scripts, and of course the physical code that is in use with DDLs, basically the create tables in the data definition language for database objects in use, supplemented with some preliminary questionnaires which collect basic information of data volumetrics and tooling details in place. So with these inputs as they are provided to us, our tools can then take that and analyze it and correlate across the entire corpus of information that we collect as part of the inputs and establish the clear state of the current state, clear current state, validate with the customer SMEs. Likewise, a utilization footprint of how the ecosystem is being utilized, which drives into the potential savings that the customer would see from the transformation. In addition to that, a very detailed inventory of the workloads is established to the most granular detail. And I'll cover a bit more about those details in the inventory in subsequent slides as well. And you'll see that in the demo as well. So along with the inventory, what we also do create as we go through across these different pieces of information is we create a dependency matrix of objects, and that goes spanning across the code, the various constructs in the codes, how they're accessing the different tables, the objects, the functions. So it's a very detailed matrix, which helps us further identify what is the actual active code in play versus there could be dead code, which is like, because a lot of these systems are age-old systems that have been written over the years, and depending on the degree of maintenance, it may or may not be fully clear for the customer, but this is assessment exercise kind of brings that clarity to that whole activity. And from the same perspective, even on the data front, looking at the queries that are being fired in the logs, we can establish a clear map of what are the actual tables being utilized in the workloads versus what are just tables which are probably lying there, which may or may not be important. So that kind of separates the hot data versus the cold data. In addition to that, during the assessment, we include target-specific recommendations as well, which basically span across the data type rationalization. So like the cloud target to a tool stack might have a different data type expectation, and those types need to be rationalized. Likewise, from a design recommendations perspective that are more target-specific to accommodate dominant patterns at a granular level in the incumbent code. Samples could also include bringing in partitioning key recommendations, partitioning strategies, bucketing strategies of the data, caching strategies as needed, and other patterns to facilitate meeting performance needs of the customer in the target environment. So basically, it's a very proactive approach, eliminating and minimizing the possibilities of rework to the extent possible, which otherwise will be an afterthought in such transformation projects. Now, in the case of this bank, we have analyzed such artifacts, and we created similar outputs that I talked about in this assessment, and we'll talk more about it in our next slide. Chris? So what you see here is basically a summarized list of the findings. Chris will walk you through some of the details in the demo as well. You'll see more than what I'm showing here. In the interest of time, it's also a little bit summarized here. But what you see here is the number of queries. This was the representative sample for this customer was a 1-month log, which kind of encompassed all their jobs that run on a frequent basis, and kind of was a good representative for their utilization. So the number of queries that were being fired in the EDW, which is essentially an Oracle database, then the counts of the unique queries, followed by unique query patterns. The unique query patterns is marked in bold. I'll come to that quickly as well. And synthesized further, we also have deeper insight into utilization and the overall ecosystem across CPU, I/O, execution time, among other things. So all these details basically help establish a baseline to select the right workloads, the order of the workloads, and also predict and kind of quantify the benefit that potentially can be derived from from migrating these workloads out of that system. Essentially, it could be an incremental savings, or it could be a full-blown big bang savings as we retire the legacy system. So it can be both ways. Now, also covered in these dimensions that we do in the assessment, we see the counts for the applications in use, the number of users hitting the system, among other things, which provide good actionable information to customers to embark on the transformation. And then all these inputs are basically, they get fed into creating the plans that we come up with. Now, let me bring your attention back to the unique query patterns that I was mentioning earlier. So why is that important? Why do we have it in bold here? So unique query patterns is one of the critical dominant cost driver that we utilize. And why I bring that up is, as customers, they're always concerned about, they get intimidated by, okay, if some automation tool charges by the query, and because EDW ecosystems are highly query intensive, it might be intimidating that will be a very expensive affair. But that's not how Impetus looks at it. And we synthesize the unique query patterns, and that is how we cost the effort. So what that does is, one, it removes the intimidating cost expectation of a per query cost, as most EDWs are highly query intensive. Secondly, it gives a fair basis and opportunity to pass on the savings back to the customer, because our automation and acceleration that our engine brings in creates that savings, and we transfer that back to the customer in the form of labor savings for these projects. Now, that is very distinct, because when compared to a manual approach of transformation, these manually every query will need to get addressed, and that would really start adding significant amount of cost. And in addition to that, our automation approach also brings the fringe benefits that I call, like error reduction and pattern matching and scalability and things of that nature, where problems have to be, or patterns that have not been accommodated, but they are redundant across the code corpus, they can basically be remediated through training the grammar engine that we have in our tool to kind of accommodate for it by fixing it once and applying it multiple times. Now, let me walk you further to a high-level architectures, before and after architectures at the bank. This is high level. The actual detailed current state architectures are much more detailed. Just in the interest of time, we have kept it simple. What we have here is the current state architecture, which is a very typical EDW implementation that you'll see in most instances, where there are two forms of data dominantly, which is basically flat files and then databases. Now, the databases are, for this bank, was powered through multiple technologies. There were some SQL Server sources, some Oracle, some DB2. And the sources are basically, the data is processed and loaded into the data marts and the data warehouse using Informatica, extensive amount of workflows created in Informatica, which is also the key target of, one of the key targets of the transformation as this architecture gets transformed to a cloud-native architecture. Likewise, post-data warehouse, there is a BI infrastructure consuming all that information. The three BI primary tools we had is Tableau, SSRS, and OBIE. And in addition to that, there are custom extracts and application endpoints. Surprisingly, that was also utilizing some of that information. Now, taking this current architecture post-assessment, a future state has been identified for this particular customer, primarily a completely AWS cloud-native architecture that's in line with the objectives Chris talked about, and also the first step for their analytics modernization by being cloud-native. So the core elements of this future transformation of this future state architecture entailed replacing Informatica, as I mentioned, which was a key goal, into a complete cloud-native PySpark-based EMR and AWS Glue combination, where AWS Glue would take care of a lot of the Informatica jobs, while in some instances where Glue might not be the fully performant choice, is basically shifted to EMR Spark based on the characteristic of the workload. So that's the ETL transformation piece. And then the data warehouse would be created in Redshift, as you see in this architecture, in a complete cloud-native environment. In addition to this architecture, one of the pieces that is being accomplished is also establishing a foundational data lake, a data lake with all the foundational elements, which take care of the data catalog, take care of security and regulatory compliance, which are of utmost importance to the bank, transforming their on-prem secure architecture into a public cloud architecture. And also being in AWS, there are so many other capabilities that come in. So we kind of established that with a mix of AWS native and third-party tools to make sure the bank stays within that compliance and likewise from their security requirements perspective. Next slide, please, Chris. So what I have here is the fourth element or the third element of what we create from assessment is the tactical plan. So these are some of the details. Again, applying the best practices with a goal of success. We follow an Agile method, as Chris touched upon earlier. This method kind of delivers measured and predictable success incrementally throughout the duration of the project. What you see in this plan, it's a multi-phase plan. We have 4 phases spread across 38 weeks. Again, we have kept it at a high level for now. It's definitely much more detailed in the tactical execution. And phase 1 is the foundational phase of the project, where largely the framework for transformation is put in place, taking a small scope relative to the other phases, but with some very concrete goals around it. And that's why you'll see that phase is a little smaller, even in the diagram we have here. What we achieve there is first building the full confidence of the approach. Likewise, secure any customer buy-ins and stakeholder enrollments is needed by our sponsors. And then also what this phase does is eliminates any potential resistance for the approach from a tactical perspective or from a political landscape perspective. Now, as we get through the phase 1, we get that done, we transition to phase 2, there is a significant ramp up, and all those subsequent phases are kind of self-contained, delivering a rolling production schedule of independent units of work. In our bank's case, they're the entire data marts. So they have a different set of data marts that we identified through the assessment that can be kind of, they're independent, they can be moved independently into production. So that was how the multi-phase plan was structured. And every iteration comprises around 8 to 10 weeks. Each iteration can be seen as a mini project by itself, where every job is validated, certified. Likewise, detailed tests are executed at different levels with a mix of automation and manual testing, making sure that the new architecture is within the expected business performance expectations and SLAs. And all this transformation occurs through the tool where the code is transformed using our grammar engine. And it goes through all the series of steps to kind of establish that consistency and certifying those results such that the transition will be completely successful and self-contained. The plan that we create covers in a complete turnkey fashion where it includes training of the customer teams on the new technology components, both from an ongoing maintenance as well as management perspective. It goes to the extent of even providing detailed runbooks for a smooth transition to the transformed infrastructure as these units are rolled out into production. The production rollout is also preceded by a reasonable duration of parallel run of the transform code to reaffirm the consistency of each and every job delivering expected results. That kind of concludes a glimpse of the meticulous planning we put into action. I'll pass back control back to my colleague Chris here. He'll showcase a demo of the accelerator look and feel, and you can see how we utilize it. Back to you, Chris.
All right, thank you, Hari. Okay, so as Hari mentioned, I'm going to jump into our workload transformation tool. And right now you're looking at the dashboard, and I'm going to take you through the assessment to give you a view of what that looks like, hitting some of those points Hari mentioned in terms of how this tool actually goes and gathers that data and is able to process it and make some recommendations from that. So since this client is Oracle, let me jump into an Oracle demo. So this is not the actual results for this client, but we'll give you a representative idea of the type of information that is available. So, we start with, gathering all those logs, the code, and being able to process, a total number of queries, how many of those are unique, what are those unique patterns that we look for as part of our transformation. It also provides a lot of different types of information, such as, what are the query types, the different constructs, the number of tables, views that I'm going to have. I'm going to scroll down because I think this is also very important to show, which is, looking over time, what is my CPU and IO utilization? And we use this for capacity planning on that cloud environment to see what are our peaks and valleys. From there, I can actually go into an analysis tab that will show me the data in a few different ways. One is looking at it by what applications are hitting this Oracle database, and I can see those applications, what resources they're using, the total number of queries that are executing against the Oracle database. I can also look at it at a user level, and I can see who are my user groups that are also consuming those resources and executing those queries. I can dive into actually the queries themselves. And one very interesting thing that comes out of this tool is we actually look at every query and provide a complexity score from 1 to 10. And those that are a 1 are going to be your very simple queries. They're probably going to translate very easily for us. But then as you start moving up that ladder into the more complex queries, you're going to get into some things that are hairier, more joins. And actually, let me just show you an example here of a 5 complexity. You can see it's certainly nothing very small. And that's why, it will probably take a little bit more time and maybe less automation as you start to get into these very complex queries. So from there, let me actually go into the recommendations. So the recommendations tab is going to give you additional information. I mentioned over here the complexity, so I can actually see my distribution. And, with this client, most of it's going to fall into that 0 to 3, but then there are a few of those that get more complex. I can also see, if there's specific queries that are actually using up higher, CPU or IO utilization. One area that I like to jump into is, around my tables. And I can actually go through each table and I can see, what is the preferred storage format. I can see what's the frequency of use so that I'm not bringing over tables that are not being used anymore. One more thing I can look at here is also a graphical view of my tables. And this goes into what Hari was mentioning, breaking up that project into logical groupings. And, if I decide I want to move a tab called, say, CSV, I can actually see how does CSV fit and what dependencies does it have on it from other tables. So if I want to move the CSV table, I can actually visually see what other tables are also going to be impacted by making that migration. So this gives you an overview. There's a lot of information that can be gathered here. I just wanted to hit some of the key highlights. And let me actually go back now to the presentation and Larry.
Great. Thank you, Hadi and Chris, for that introduction and overview, and Chris for the detailed look at some of the dashboards related to the assessment and planning phase. If our ops team would close and display the results for our audience now, we'll go through those. You should be seeing those momentarily here on your screen. And there they are. And you'll recall that the poll had asked what stage of the analytics transformation journey are you currently in. You had 5 different options. 20% have not yet started, and so hopefully this that we're covering today will be very, very helpful. 10%, or another 20%, let's say, are either under consideration, maybe in a planning stage, or actively executing a POC or pilot. And half of our audience today has migrated at least a portion of their analytics to a modern data architecture, and that usually means the cloud. So very, very interesting. Thank you very much for responding to that poll. And I'll turn it back over now to Chris to take us through the next 2 phases, which have to do with transformation and validation. Chris?
Thanks, Larry. So as you mentioned, we'll go through transform and validate, and this is really where I would say the magic happens. And I'll start by showing this graphic and walking you through the 4 steps of transformation and validation. And then I'm going to show you a demo that will make it much more real for you once you see that. So we start with, in the transform bucket, we start by migrating the schema in the data from the source to the target. And doing this allows us it's our way of getting started, and then it also allows us to move into step 2, which is to validate that data. So now that I've established that schema, in this case in AWS, I've now migrated that data over, and now I'm going to actually validate the results to make sure that what I have in my source system is now what I have in my target system. So I can do a min-max, I can do sums, I can even do custom validation algorithms as part of that process. Then what I'm going to do is move into the logic transformation. And this is where a lot of the automation really comes into play, because for this bank, we're actually going to be migrating their Informatica workflows, their Oracle queries, their PL SQL, and we've got to be able to translate that into like-to-like functionality on the target system. So in this case, we can move it into Spark code that will work and is fully compatible. So as part of this, we can often get 80% automated translation here. And what we follow is what we call a 60-20-20 rule. And that states that 60% of that code is going to be in that low complexity. It's going to translate and perform very well right out of the box. Then you're going to have another 20% that's going to translate, but it's going to require some level of manual intervention in order to make it perform properly in the new environment. And then finally, you're going to have 20% that is going to be manual. And anyone who tells you they can do fully automated is probably lying to you. That 20% is going to be quite often, very complex code. It could be code that has issues with it. It could also be code that just needs to be looked at because it's been around for, say, 10 plus years, and it may not fit fully, with how things are operating now in the current and future states. So we're going to do that 60-20-20, apply that, get that automation, and then once we've transformed that code, now we're going to, again, run it through another validation step. So where we're going to run those queries and actually evaluate the results on both the source and the target to once again ensure that we're getting the same results. And you'll see, one thing I wanted to point out on the left-hand side is, we can do this for a number of technologies. So it's, in this case, we're talking Oracle and Informatica, but we can do it on a range of EDW and ETL technologies, and we can move that into, multiple cloud environments. So with that, let me actually show you what this looks like. So you've seen this graphic, and now I'm going to show you what it looks like actually in the workload transformation tool. So again, I'm going to start with that migration. That's going to be my data migration. And then I'm going to execute a validation on that data, and I can actually execute that in a couple different ways. And then I'm ready to do a translation. And that's where I'm going to transform my code. I'm going to validate the queries, and then I'm ready to execute that. So let me actually show you in the design view so you can get an idea of how this is configured. So I'll dive into the translation. And you can see the various source types. This is not an exhaustive list, but this gives you an idea of the various EDWs that we support, and of course, we also do the same for ETL. I'm going to do my SQL as well as my stored procedures. I have the option to put that into Hive, Spark, Snowflake, Databricks, which is not even shown here. And then how am I going to, my output? So how do I want to package that? In this case, we're going to go with Python, but we could also do Scala and Java as well. So these are some of the options just based on the EDW that I'm choosing. It will give me options in terms of how I want to translate that. So then I will load my files and I'll be ready to translate. So again, let me go back and actually show you what that's going to look like when I transform that code. So this time, instead of going to the pipeline, I'm going to go to the output. Let's see what the output looks like for that translation. So what I executed were 5 queries as part of a Python code, Spark, and I was able to execute 100% of those, in a few minutes. Took 11 more seconds to validate those results, and I can actually go down and see some of those queries. So this very first query is interesting because I can actually expand it. It's not a very long query, but it was run successfully. It was auto-translated. And one thing that's interesting about it is actually use the UDF or user-defined function. And those user-defined functions are very important where we find that the translation is not always a one-to-one when we're making that translation. And this UDF will allow us to bridge that. And this is something that we've built up over time in order to get our automation percentages up into that 80+% range. And is very important for applying it consistently, and also it helps with the speed of the entire project. So I can look at a few others, right? I've got, more code. I won't go through any of these in any detail here, but you can see, take that original query and is able to translate that into code that is ready to work and is compatible on the target environment. So with that, let me come back to the presentation. And we're ready to move into the execute step. And I'll turn it back over to Hari.
Thank you again, Chris, for walking us through that. As I mentioned earlier, we deliver measured and predictable successes incrementally in our plans. The execute step is the final step for each such installment and increment. So as we are done transforming each data mart and its associated workloads and the whole entire job workflows that are as part of that increment, it is ready for production. We take care of the housekeeping for that installment as part of that execute step. This includes concluding the activities of the parallel run, certifying results, finalizing pipelines for orchestration, and executing them, making sure the customer team is fully prepared to take over. It's fully trained. They know what to expect. All the fixings of the enterprise readiness from a production perspective are in place, verified and ready to go, and a seamless transition is ready to go. And as we do this, it is again within the scope of the guided best practices and the Agile methodology that we bring into bear. This spans across making sure all the security compliance is in place, the disaster recovery is in place, and it's really enterprise ready to go for production. Next slide, please, Chris. So at the conclusion of the execute step, there are these 2 scenarios that we usually happen, where one is we either transition this whole DevOps and maintenance to the customer's team so that they have all the necessary training done and they can take care of it going forward, or Impetus takes over that DevOps support if the customer chooses to do so. And in the case of the banking customer, actually Impetus has also been asked to take care of that and is providing the ongoing DevOps maintenance so that whatever processes have been transformed, they are still fully supported, and there is the element of risk of that transition is also kind of eliminated because our teams are fully aware of that corpus and they can fully support the customer in success in an ongoing basis from there on. So this kind of concludes the execute step as well. It's a shorter step that way. with a successful transition into a transformed modern data architecture landscape, which is the first step of our bank's analytics transformation journey. And they are well positioned to now to expand that further and take advantage of the whole cloud native ecosystem with all the enterprise readiness fixings and the compliance that they expect. I'll transfer back to Larry.
Great, thank you, Hadi and Chris, again for the comprehensive view of the methodology and, frankly, the case study that we've shared here about this bank engagement. Just to summarize what we've covered, we've actually gone through in some fair detail each of the 4 steps from assess and plan, transform, validate, and execute. We also have shared the best practices that are a foundation and are supported by the automation methodology, and that positions you, depending on where you're at in your journey, to take that next important step toward modernizing your analytics infrastructure. What we'd like to do next is take a look at the questions that have come in. In addition, at this time, you'll also have the opportunity to rate your experience on the webinar. And also, we have one more polling question. And the second polling question is for those of you who would like more information or an actual customized deep dive of the products as shown in the webinar. You have the opportunity to respond to that here, and we'll follow up with you. It's also important that you take the time to rate your webinar experience. And very important are the comments and feedback. We take those very seriously. We look at each one. And in fact, I could give many examples of where feedback from different audiences regarding their user experience has caused us to change different ways that we do all of this. Having said that, we'd like to move now to the question and answer portion of our webinar experience. And the first question that we have here is actually probably targeted for you, Hadi. And it says that my environment has been around a long time, talking about their EDW warehousing environment. And there's a lot we haven't touched in a long time. How would you begin to tackle that? And Hadi, if you want to step in on that.
Thank you, Larry. It's a great question. And certainly, as I mentioned, EDW environments have been around for a long time, and they can go through multiple iterations over the years. And there would be instances where the customer would not have full visibility of what exactly is in use and not in use and things like that. And when we conduct the detailed assessment, we are able to filter that out. We are able to correlate through our dependency matrix. And that gives a very good visibility and understanding of their incumbent environment, and also sets the right foundation information basis to create what they would really need in the future from a modernization perspective, and not have to carry their technical debt and all the debt code that which otherwise would get pooled in with everything else. We kind of through our assessment exercise, we can really help them separate that and provide that visibility. Back to you, Larry.
Excellent, thank you. Chris, maybe you want to take the next one. And the next question that we have here asks, which cloud service providers do you support? We've made some reference to that at different points in the webinar, but you may want to re-summarize that.
Yeah, sure, Larry. So we support all the major service cloud providers. That includes AWS, Azure, Google. We support IBM as well. So for us, we're a bit agnostic in terms of which cloud environment you want to go to, and we can support them all.
Excellent, great. Hadi, there's another question here which asks if you've observed some key trends in the banking industry across these different banking engagements that we've had. What are the key trends you're seeing from migrating banking to the cloud?
Certainly, Larry. That's a great question. So the EDW transformation that we talked about today is definitely the first step in the trends that follow. The key drivers or the trends that are there are essentially very market-oriented, creating personalization for customers. That's a very dominant trend for the customers today in the banking industry. And in lockstep with that, this is definitely the first step. And what that does is also what trends we see is transforming a lot of those rule-based analytics for personalization and for deeper insights into their customer base. It's the transformation of going into a more AI ML-based analysis and AI and ML-based actionable analytics, and establishing this EDW or the data lake foundation and the collaborative platforms, breaking down silos are pretty much the dominant trends. And this spans across the industries. It's not just banking specific, but we see this across all the industries largely, where there is a major push towards kind of flattening that data platform access and remove those silos so that more and more insights could be derived from them. And banking is also along the same lines from a trend perspective today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hadi. Chris, here's another one that may be good for you in your work with the different banks or work. It says, what is the typical duration of a project like this to migrate to the cloud?
Okay. I mean, obviously the answer can be, it could be anything. But if you want a good idea, I would say typically a smaller environment could be done in as little as 3 months. Where you start to get into larger environments, I would say about 9 to 10 months, and certainly can be larger just depending on the size, but I would typically characterize as you're looking at a 3 to 9 month journey.
Okay, good. There's another question that has just come in. It says, if we simply want to do an assessment, and you recall back to that initial poll that we had up front that talked about where people were at in their journey, some 40% were in the initial consideration and POC, pilot, planning stages, discovery, and so forth. And that may have prompted this question. The question says, if we simply want to do an assessment to help guide our strategy and planning without committing to the full project that you've described here, is that an option? And Chris, you're maybe a good one to address that.
Yeah, I'll take that. And it's a great question, because the answer is yes. And we present the entire 4-step approach, but we certainly start with that assess and plan, and that is something that we can scope out separately. It's a small investment, in some ways investment on both of our times to work towards that larger transformation without any commitment to doing that. But yeah, I would be happy to share more about the steps that are involved, as well as some of the outputs that you would get and how that process would flow.
Good, great. That brings us to the close of our webinar today. Thank you again for your participation, for responding to the 2 polls. I would remind you again before you exit to please rate your webinar experience on that 1 to 5 scale, and would love for you to add any other comments or feedback that you may have. And lastly, as you'll see on your screen right now, you obviously can go to our website for more information, but for specific questions, specific follow-ups, and so forth, you can reach us at inquiry@impetus.com. And people like Chris and Hari will take those and be sure to follow up with you. So thank you again for being with us today. I trust this has been of great value to you, regardless of where you're at in your journey. And Hadi and Chris, thank you again for the comprehensive coverage. And this concludes our webinar.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar.